Welcome to the Story Nerd Podcast, Hook Your Reader episode. This is where we give authors our professional advice about their query letters and first 10 pages writing samples. My name is Valerie Francis. I'm an author and a story editor, and I teach readers how to craft a book so good that it hooks a reader on page one and never lets them go.
I am Kathleen Fox. I'm a literary agent with the Rights Factory in Toronto and a freelance editor at Fox Editorial.
On today's episode, we're reviewing a work of literary contemporary fiction from Joanna Cozzolino. Now, it takes a lot of guts for writers to send in their work and have it reviewed publicly, like it really does. This is a bit nerve-wracking for everybody. But I think that it shows that they're willing to step out and bet on themselves. And so Kathleen and I are more than happy to help. So Joanna, thank you so much for sharing your work and for giving us all an opportunity to learn. Now, before we get started, we would love it if you could help other writers find our show by leaving a rating and review. Apple Podcast listeners, you can do it right from your phone. Just go to the show's landing page, scroll to the bottom. It is that simple. And a little thank you, because I know you're doing this, because we just hit 151 countries, which is 77.5% of the globe. So thank you so much. Keep spreading the word. It's amazing. I'm chuffed. I really am. And if you're watching us on YouTube, please hit the like and subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Okay, Kathleen, I'll begin by reading Joanna's query letter, and then we'll get your thoughts.
Sounds
Here
good.
we go. Hello, I hope you're having a wonderful day. I'm seeking representation for my debut novel, 13 Years and 13 More. It's a work of literary contemporary fiction, complete at 71,900 words. I'm sure it's a book that will interest you, having read on your website the kinds of work you're looking for. Set in London between 2004 and 2005, from September to September, the novel follows Elia Bonner, a young woman reeling from the absence of her older brother and a life-altering decision made by her parents. As she confronts love, abandonment, and self-destruction, Elia becomes entangled in obsession, alienation, and unfulfilled desire. Through Elia's distinctive and compelling voice, the novel explores her troubled world, examining how family choices and mental health struggles fracture lives, and how, in their aftermath, they reshape identity and survival. I believe 13 Years and 13 More will appeal to readers of Elena Ferrante's The Days of Abandonment and Elizabeth Strout's My Name is Lucy Barton. Like Ferrante, it captures the intensity of a woman unraveling in grief, despair, and isolation. And like Strout, my novel explores estrangement, loneliness, and the complexities of family. I would also like to draw similarities to the works of Gail Honeywell's Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine, where the protagonist inhabits a lonely and troubled world, where her perception of reality are both a sanctuary and a prison. I'm originally from Edinburgh, where I now live with my family. I returned to Scotland just before lockdown, following 10 years in London, working as a radio producer at the BBC. During the pandemic, I enrolled in the Writers Bureau's novel and short story course, which inspired me to pursue writing beyond personal enjoyment. I am drawn to exploring family, memory, and identity in my fiction. My short story, All About My Mother, and flash fiction piece, The Girl in the Forest, were both long-listed by Retreat West, and several of my micro-shorts have been published online with 101 words. Or 101 words. I'm not sure which it is. That's a Valerie edit, by the way. Joanna didn't write that in her letter. I would be delighted to send you my full manuscript or further chapters. I am committed to making 13 Years and 13 More a success and will work hard to see its fruition. I have also developed outlines for 2 further novels. Thank you so much for your time. Kind regards, Joanna Cozzolino. All right, Kathleen, you're up. What do you think?
Okay, just a quick note before I get started. For our listeners and viewers, please know that my advice or recommendations or my opinions are my own and are not reflective of the Rights Factory or other agents. Anything I share here is based on my experiences in the industry as an agent and as an editor. So first of all, I really like the title. I like interesting titles, unique titles. I think it's interesting. It feels like it has a literary vibe to it. The word count is good. And once we get into the plot paragraph, it is easy to see that this is indeed a character-driven novel. But I noticed that only, when we get down to the comp paragraph, only one of the comps was published within the last 3 to 5 years. Eleanor Oliphant was 2018 and is coming of age or women's fiction, and Lucy Barton was published in 2016, and that's the one that's distinctly in the literary fiction category. Days of Abandonment was published in 2025, so that works. That's great. That time frame is perfect, and it's listed as women's fiction. So I would maybe examine a little more closely either the comp titles that you're using or the genre or category that you're pitching in because they're not quite lining up. You might pitch it as a coming of age novel, for example, because Elia is a young woman going through all of these pivotal moments. She's discovering who she is on the other side of it. Of age can be literary fiction, but it doesn't have to be. Um, the thing is, at least in my case, agents can they can get literary fiction in their inbox, and then it very, very quickly becomes apparent that it is not literary fiction, and that it's not meeting those standards. So, if an author is pitching literary fiction, they need to be 1,000% sure that that is where their story is and where their writing is as well. It's got to be extra spectacular so that it is worthy of the literary fiction category. Um, the personalization is also very generic, so I recommend making it specific to each agent that you're querying, and that way you're letting each agent know why you think you're going to make a good fit together. Um, and again, the comp section. So we have a brief introductory paragraph, and then we have a plot paragraph that's also quite brief, and then we have the comp section. And the comp section is taking up 93 words of the query. Um, First of all, I do like to see the comps in the opening paragraph with the rest of the, like the book's metadata, to keep those things together. And then it gives me an idea of the story's vibe before I get into it. Um, but the intro paragraph usually should be around 75 to 100 words ish. Um, and so these 90 some odd words takes up almost all that space, and that's just on the comps. So the current opening paragraph is almost 50 words. So that means you've got about 40 or 50 left for that space to give us information about your comps. The comp section can be pared down. I think it's a little bit wordy. Um, Especially when you have only about 350, 375 words for the entire letter. You have to make every single word count. Brevity is key. And I would also try to narrow your comps down to two if you can. Like, you can use a third one. It's not like it's a rule or something like that, but only if it's really, really, really relevant and really makes sense to use that third comp. And I don't think you need to specifically state your novel's themes. You can work the themes into the comps depending on what you're using. But those themes should be woven into the plot paragraphs, how they're written. So agents will be able to pick up on that if they're written well. And then let's go back up to the plot paragraph. While we do want specificity in the query letter, I don't think it's necessary to say that this takes place from September to September. It's just a very minor thing, but it does take up a couple of extra words, and I don't think it's necessary, not in regards to the query letter. Um, the plot paragraph is written so that it feels like you're telling us about the book and not about the story. So I'm seeing like little, I call them disconnecting phrases, like it's set in, etc. The novel follows, and later we have things like through Ilya's distinctive voice and the novel explores. So these are all little phrases that are taking us out of whatever's happening in the plot. We want to dive right into the character introduction, what her norm is, what the inciting incident is, et cetera, et cetera. We want to see all of those things, goals, obstacles, stakes, and um, who or what is standing in her way, that kind of stuff. But my question, or what I'm noticing, is that there's not a lot about the plot there. So I don't really know what is happening in this story. Um, what I really want to know is, what is her end goal? Who's standing in her way, and what is she risking by trying to meet that goal? What happens if she loses? What happens if she achieves that goal? So I am finding that there is a lack of direction and tension here. I don't know exactly what's going on, therefore I can't understand what precisely she's dealing with and why that matters. It's clear that she has had some big life event happen. It's affecting her internally, which is great. It's a character-driven story, but I still don't know what is happening in the plot. Um, It also notes that Ilya has a distinctive and compelling voice. And I just want to point that out here because instead of telling us that the character has a distinctive voice, we should be picking that up in the plot paragraphs. They should be written, like with voice. They should be voicey. We should get a taste of that distinctive, compelling voice based on how the plot paragraphs are written. So, aside from specificity, agents want to see voice, tension, emotion, and curiosity in the query letter. Um, the last thing is the closing paragraph or paragraphs in this case. That whole section is about 150 words, excuse me, which is about 3 times what it should be. The bio paragraph should be about 50 to 75 words, and then a quick closing line. So I would suggest paring this down and only mentioning what you feel is absolutely necessary in the query letter. The most important part of the query letter is, of course, the plot. So if, sorry. So if there's not enough room to describe the plot well because you're taking up all of the space with all of these other paragraphs, then there's not really enough, there's not a chance to entice the agent and they won't get to the pages. So that's very, very important. Um, yeah, I think those are my main thoughts on the query letter. Just make sure that we have more of an understanding of what's happening in the story.
For questions. Um, when I first read Joanna's query letter, that is what I noticed as well, the plot paragraph, um, or the absence of a plot paragraph. You're right, she does talk about the book generally, but not the plot. And a theme is not a plot, right? And for
Yes.
a story to work, regardless of the genre, regardless of whether it's literary or horror or something else, for the story to work, you need both plot and character, which sounds like a weird thing to say, um, but sometimes it needs um, being said. So, Kathleen, my question is this for you as an agent. If this was in your inbox, your query inbox, what would you do with this? Like, what would your reaction be? Is the lack of a plot description an issue for you or for agents? And if so, how big of an issue is it?
I would say that is a big issue because the plot is the most important part. If we don't understand the plot, then we don't have any idea where the story is going. And I know that sometimes, like, I've done it before too. I've done it in my own query letters. It is hard to pare it down and pick out the most important parts of your story. So it's not, it's, we don't always get a query letter that matches, like the pages might be fantastic. And there might be something in that query letter, just one little tiny thing that piques my curiosity, and then I will get to the pages. But if there isn't, if there's not something that speaks directly to me and my tastes and what I'm looking for, then I probably won't get to the pages because I don't know anything about the story.
There is actually a really easy way to do your plot paragraphs. I have one training on it. I'm going to do another one. It took me, when I say it's easy when you know how to do it. It took me years to figure out how to do it. So stay tuned for that. Okay. Also, Joanna says that her book, in her query letter, that hers is a book that she is sure you'll be interested in based on the kinds of works that you've listed on your website. Should she be more specific? Like, what specifically is it in your manuscript wish list or on your website that makes her think that her book is a match for what you're looking for? Should she be that specific, or is what she has written here uh, good enough?
For me personally, I have a lot of stuff listed on my manuscript wish list.
Yes, you
So
do.
yeah. um, but I do that because it gives people a better idea of what it is I'm looking for. And if my tastes are wide, then this author over here might be writing something that is on my list, and so is this author, but it's completely different. So I just like to give as much information as I can, and I also list what I don't want, what I'm not interested in. Um, I think it is good to mention that in a query letter because I know that you're not just throwing spaghetti at a wall and you're querying me for a specific reason. And B, if if you're using that line of personalization to say like, "Hey, I looked at your manuscript wish list and these 2 novels really speak to me. I love them. I'm so glad that they're your favorites too." I mean, you wanna be, not as wordy as that, but if you're pointing, a novel or 2 out that I have mentioned in my wish list, and it's pertinent to maybe what you're writing, that's immediately gonna catch my attention.
Okay. Now, Joanna says that her book is literary contemporary fiction. This is the thing with genre that we all need to just accept because it's a reality of the business that we're in. And it's this: there's no set definition of genre. In fact, some people think that genre fiction is sort of lowbrow, like the whole word genre is anathema to them. When I say genre, I simply mean what type of book it is. So when we're in the writing seat and we're creating the story in the first place, for me, literary is not a genre. It's not a okay. As I'm saying this, I'm thinking about the story grid genre clover because that to me makes the most logical sense in understanding genre. So one of the leaves on the clover is about the plot, and that is where our definition of genre tends to come from. So that's like love story, mystery, thriller, uh, whatever. Literary is in the style category. And so when I think of literary in the creation phase of a story, literary simply means the style of writing. Okay, so that's fine. Once we decide we want to get an agent and query and we decide we want to bring our manuscript to market, we've got to start thinking about genre in a totally different way because an agent's perspective of genre is totally different than a writer's perspective of genre. One isn't right, one isn't wrong, one isn't better, one isn't worse. They're just different. And so we need to understand what the other person is talking about when they say a particular thing like upmarket fiction. That is meaningless to me as a creator of a story. But as soon as I want to sell that story, I need to know what upmarket fiction means. So, with that huge big preamble, Kathleen, my question to you is this: what does literary fiction mean to you as an agent? When you see that in a query letter, what are you expecting?
I am expecting a character-driven novel, so a slower pace, but there still has to be tension there. And I am expecting that the writing is just gonna be, like, top-notch, and it's not to say that commercial or upmarket is not top-notch, but you're right, it is about the style of writing, and, there might be lines. Something that I think is more common in literary fiction is you see a line and it's just like, oh my goodness, that hits home and it makes the reader pause and go back and read it again because it's just so beautiful and resonating. And you might have that in commercial fiction, but it just doesn't have the same vibe. It doesn't feel the same. So it's very elevated prose for sure, and something that's more character driven.
Following up from that, then, you mentioned that in the I can't remember exactly what you said, but in the query letter, you're expecting it to be voicey. What did you mean by that?
So, and that doesn't really have anything to do with what category it's in, literary, upmarket, commercial. That just means, um, when your character has a certain voice, the narrator has that certain voice. It might be like spicy or, they're, I don't want to say down and out because that's kind of that's not always a super interesting character, but like it has to match. The voice in the query letter should match the vibe and the voice of the overall story, if that makes sense. Like it's
Okay. Okay. So another follow-up question to make sure I'm understanding, because to me, the query letter is written by the author,
yes,
but the story is written by the narrator, which is
yes,
not the author. It can be
correct.
really close to the author sometimes, but the narrator is not the author.
Mhm.
Am I getting confused here? What do you mean?
No, no, so that makes sense, and that's actually that makes sense. It's absolutely right. So there is authorial voice, and there's the character voice, and those are usually different. Not always, um, but the query letter, yes, it needs to be in the author voice, but it has to show the 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 vibe of the story. You know what I mean? Like using certain words that are. I'm just trying to think of an example. Like if your character is. I'm trying to think of an example on the spot.
Sorry, I put you on the spot. I didn't
Ah,
mean
no,
to.
that's okay. It's
So
hard to distinguish, like, what I mean. It's hard to put it into words, but the query letter should be it should kinda run along the same vibe of the voices in the story. You know what I
so it
mean?
should also be literary in style and sort of showing what the author is capable of? Is that what you mean?
Yes and no. Yeah, I mean, if you're querying a literary novel, then there should be elevated prose in the query letter too, but it's your plot paragraph specifically. Like, usually when I'm reading a query letter, I can see a subtle difference between the intro paragraph and especially the bio paragraph versus the plot paragraph, right?
Okay.
Because if you're telling me about the book and the metadata and all of that, and then you're telling me about yourself, like that's you and your voice. But if you're telling me about the plot, there's just a different vibe there. So when I say voicey, it should have kind of the vibe that's in the story. The word choices should match that, if
Okay.
that makes sense.
And the last question, because I know this one comes up a lot. Agents want comps that are in the last 3 to 5 years. Why?
Because, when you're talking about comps in terms of a query letter, you're shifting into marketing brain, and books that were marketed 10 years ago, 15 years ago, they're completely different now. We have a different way of looking at things. There's different things on the market now. So you're looking for, like, if you're comparing your book to something else that did really, really well, you want it to be as recent as possible because it's gonna be, maybe marketed in that same way.
Okay. All right, well, let's move on to the first 10 writing pages, because otherwise, people will be here for hours. And they don't have hours to listen to us. Okay, so why don't you go first and, give us your thoughts on Joanna's first 10 pages writing sample?
Yeah, so one of the first things I started feeling curious about in the opening pages, or specifically the first page, was whether or not Jack is dead. Jack is her brother, and he left, and their parents let him leave, and or they had something to do with that decision. And just the more I read, the more curious about that I got. There's just certain things that she says that makes me think that maybe it's not leaving in the sense that he got up and walked away. Maybe it's leaving in a different sense. Um, so, like, I'm trying to come up with, I'm theorizing, which is what I should be doing. Um, Maybe he was sick. Maybe he needed to let go, and their parents let him let go. Maybe she's angry about it. She talks a lot about her brother in the opening pages, memories about him, letters she writes to him, dreams she has about him, conversations she has with him in her mind, um, and visualizing what he would say to her. I personally think he is no longer with us. So there's this mystery there, about Jack that's kind of hovering, and it feels like that part is done really well. We don't know yet, but she keeps talking about him and making me think more and more that he has died. So as a reader, I'm going to keep reading because I want to find out if my theory is correct. And I was also really curious by the end of the first page who the boy is. And I say it like that because she's capitalized the boy. I like that you just drop that curiosity seed there and just let us wonder. And it's even better because you've capitalized it. So we know there's something important about him. The fact that he's unnamed makes me wonder if maybe he ends up doing something to hurt her and she's holding a grudge, but he might still have this profound effect on her. She won't name him, but he still occupies a space in her head rent free, and has to refer to him as something. So I'm really curious about who the boy is, and I want to read further to find out more. The trouble I'm having is that we are jumping around a lot in the timeline. So it gets confusing for me to try and keep track of what's happening when. And the biggest problem I'm seeing here is that we're starting with a lot of backstory. So the whole opening 10 pages are essentially almost all backstory. And in any novel, we have to be so, so, so careful about when and where and how to place backstory. We should only be revealing what the reader needs to know to understand the story, to understand the reason behind why a character is doing or saying something, to propel the plot forward. And we should basically only insert backstory when we get to a point or a question in the present that can only be understood and answered by going to the past. And even then, get into the backstory or flashback and get right back out as quickly as possible and seamlessly as possible so that you are not slowing the momentum of the current story, the present day story. Because anytime you stop the present story to go into backstory, you're stopping the present story. And we need to keep that momentum going as much as possible. So it is a lot of backstory here. There is sort of a shift to the present tense on page 2, but then we dive right back into memories. So nothing is really happening in the present moment until her birthday, when the boy disappoints her by not calling. And I can't even be sure that this is the present moment because we've jumped around in the timeline, and she talks about this as if it happened in the past. Plus, it's written in past tense, so it is hard to tell. Um, so for me, I'm not convinced that this is the real opening of the story. Technically, it's all backstory. So nothing is happening right now. It's memories about her brother, the boy, writing in her diary, getting stung by a wasp, burning a wasp, her parents. So even in a character-driven story, there still should be something happening in the present scene that captures my attention and doesn't let go. So I think these specific memories have the makings of a character driven novel, but I'm not sure that the first chapter is the best place to lay all of those out. I also wondered about Ilya pursuing her dream to be an artist. If she loves art so much that she's seriously pursuing it, we don't find that out until a few pages in. Um, maybe closer to the end of the 10th page. I can't remember which page exactly. But I would think that that would be ingrained in in much of what she does and even what she thinks about. But it hasn't even come up until she talks about her grandfather's sketchbooks. Um, so I think it should be more present in the narrative, and I think it should be prior to when we find out if it's a big dream she has, and if it continues to have a place in the story. Um, does this mean she's in school for art? I think it mentions that she was in school, but I don't know if she's still in school. She lives in an apartment, so I don't know if she goes to school, if she has a job. She seems to have a lot of time on her hands. Like she gets bored and she's in her apartment a lot. She goes for a walk in Hyde Park. And these things are all happening during weekdays when would normally be in school or at work. So I wondered how she pays for the apartment. So we know that she doesn't have a great relationship with her parents. We know Jack is not there. We don't know yet whether if he's just moved away or if he is no longer with us. Um, yeah, and her parents, like, they didn't even call her on her birthday. She also didn't get a call from the boy on her birthday. So there's just lots of memories and things like that. So I'm not yet sure where the story is going or where the inciting incident will be that throws her onto this journey. It could be that her brother died if that's what happened. There's just, like it's a very, very emotional response to have her brother just be, moved away or something like that. So that's why I think he probably is dead. But we don't know. And if that is the inciting incident, that's okay, but it already happened off page. So it has happened in the past. So I'm wondering what is going to happen now in the present that is going to throw her on whatever journey we're going to see her take in this novel. Um, and I'm not feeling any tension in these opening pages, which is crucial. Tension must be in every story and not just in commercial fiction, right? You have those high action scenes, but in literary novels, it's emotional tension and it's internal stakes. So right now, if the worst about has already happened to her, if Jack left or died, what could be worse than that? Because she has taken it pretty hard. How will it affect her internal stakes and her goals? Um, so this is the kind of information that we need to get to, or at least have a hint about. Um, in literary fiction, the narrative forces the protagonist into a situation where they can't hide from themselves or anybody else. And that's where that tension comes from. So readers will read to see if the protagonist breaks or how they're going to get themselves out of a situation. Um, and again, the prose must be distinct and elevated. It should feel like almost poetic and very intentional. Every line should be working overtime to accomplish more than one thing. So tell us something about the scene, but also reveal something about the character, their emotional state, or something to do with the themes you're tackling. And like I said before, there should be those kind of universally resonating lines that really hit home for readers. Um, so yeah, I'm definitely not saying that this does not have the makings of a good story, but I don't know enough about the premise from the query letter to even wager a guess about where the story is headed. So I do think that the story itself needs to have a stronger and more compelling opening and elevated prose as well.
This is really interesting. This is the first time we've done a literary story, and Kathleen, I wondered what was gonna happen. I thought, are we gonna come to blows over this, or what is gonna happen? But you know what? Uh, Everything I'm gonna say is pretty much, I could almost say ditto. So it's really interesting that you and I are coming at the same writing sample from totally different perspectives, and yet we're coming back with very similar comments. I think that's really useful information to have for Joanna and anybody else who's writing literary fiction. Yay. Okay, so first of all, Joanna, I have to say that I love, love, love the fact that this story is set in London. It is one of my favorite places in the world. I was there with my sister a few years ago, and we are both dreaming of returning. We can't wait. Now, yes, we saw the tourist version of London, but that's okay. I still love it. And any story that's set in London, whether it's contemporary fiction or historical fiction, like that's ticking a real serious box for me. So, yay. I also like that in the query letter, Joanna is specifically saying that the story takes place over the course of a year. W- Now, what do I like about that? Maybe an agent doesn't need to know that, but me with my editor hat on, why did that make me smile? There's a real logical reason for this. I'm nothing if not pragmatic. Very often, writers try to cover too much in one novel, and the story just starts. Well, one of two things happens. Either the story becomes so thin that the writer can't get into anything because they're trying to do like a cradle to grave type of story, or a story maybe that spans 20 years or 25 years. And so because when you're trying to span that amount of time, you don't have the word count to get into any particular episode of that character's life in any great detail. So the story can become really thin. The other thing that happens is that the manuscript will balloon because the writer really wants to get into the specifics and the different moments in the character's life. And so suddenly, instead of the manuscript being 80,000 words, it's 250,000 words, and that's way too long. So I love that you have a definite beginning and a definite end. And like Kathleen, I'm going to have a little more to say on the timeline in just a second. And of course, that given the fact that Joanna has identified this as a literary novel, I'm not surprised to see that the line writing is good. I expect nothing less. It's not poetic, in my opinion, but that's not a criticism, in my opinion. My take on line writing, regardless of the genre, is that it should get out of the way of the story. Really great line writing, whether it's literary fiction or a good old mystery, one of my all-time favorite genres. The reader knows that they're reading words on a page, right? If any of the writing trips them up, you've broken the spell. So the writing should be so smooth and so fluid, regardless of the genre, that the reader just gets lost in the story. And one of the things that writers of literary fiction really wanna do is use literary devices. Obviously you do. That's what we all wanna do. Like, for example, a metaphor or a simile. They're hard to do well. If you can do them well, do them, because a great and if you can't do them well, practice them. Seriously, and notice them in the books that you're reading, highlight them. Have a list of metaphors and similes that really worked for you so that you can start to see not that you're gonna copy them, but you're gonna see how they're working, right? That's the only way to really learn them. A really amazing metaphor or simile, it doesn't attract attention to the words. What it does is create a picture in the reader's mind, and they don't even know that they've read a metaphor or a simile. They just all of a sudden have a feeling of the touch of the fabric or what someone's skin feels like or the scent of someone's perfume or the sound of the violin, whatever. That's the beauty of language. So I think the line writing is perfectly fine. Uh, just I always say I'd say the word just. I only caution writers of literary fiction to not get so caught up in the poetry of the language that they forget to tell a story. Okay, so with all of that said, Joanna, I do have a couple of suggestions for how you could strengthen your first 10 pages. And, there's a lot going on here. I'm not entirely sure how to parse it. From a technical perspective, I would suggest indenting the paragraphs. Now, that's an easy enough fix. And I seriously doubt that it's a deal breaker. Kathleen, correct me if I'm wrong. But indented paragraphs are standard. And I would think that's what any reader would be expecting. And it helps us read it on the page. It makes it easier to scan the pages. From a craft perspective, my main suggestion is to focus on learning how to write working scenes. Because once we know how to do that, a whole lot of other common storytelling problems, they just kind of work themselves out. For instance, your main character is almost entirely passive. Now, I know this is very common in literary novels. Just because a lot of writers do it doesn't mean it necessarily works. Passive protagonists are extremely difficult to pull off. Can it be done? Sure. Absolutely, it can be. And it can be done in literary fiction. But here's what it means. It means that your knowledge of the craft has to be extremely high. And I do mean extremely high. And when I say the craft, I mean your ability to tell an engaging story. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're doing. We're telling stories. That's why people buy books, because they want to read a story. If they wanted to read pretty language and pretty sentences, they would read a poetry book. And poems, great poems also tell a story, actually. Now that I've said that, I'm correcting myself immediately. The only thing that, Elia wants in these opening pages, and Kathleen, you mentioned on wants, objects of desire as well. The only thing she wants is for her boyfriend, the boy, to call her on her birthday, and when he doesn't, she decides to go out and party with another friend. So that's fine as far as it goes, except it's not compelling enough for an opening, scene from a novel, and I'm gonna say this, I'm not sure if it's accurate or not because we didn't get clear plot paragraphs in the query letter, but my sense is that it wasn't really a story about Ilya's relationship with the boy. It's more about her relationship with her family and her brother in particular. But, there's not really anything specific about the brother in these opening pages other than to say that the parents made him go. We don't know why he had to go. I didn't pick up that he maybe had died at all. My brain didn't go there. And we know that Elia thinks about him often. So when there was no mention of the plot in the query, I thought it was probably one of two things was happening there. Either Joanna is simply new to writing query letters, and this is the kind of mistake that we all make when we're learning to write query letters. Query letters are a totally different skill than writing a novel. It's a sales letter versus prose. Totally different skill. So we all make lots of mistakes. No problem. Well, problem if this was a real query, but this is not a real query. We all get to learn here. The other thing I thought it might be is that the manuscript doesn't contain a plot, which, again, I know sounds like a ridiculous thing to say, but it happens especially with literary novels. That is not a feature of a literary novel, the lack of plot. That is actually a bug. That is why a lot of people pick up um, books that they think they're supposed to read. Because in literature, we have this thing where there is if you're a real bookworm, that you have to read these books, and there's a whole status thing about it, and then these other books are lowbrow, and you sort of had to keep those to yourself and not tell people that you read them. I've never bought into that my whole life. Read what floats your boat, and that's great. If literary floats your boat, have at it. Most of the people I know, they will never say it in public, but they sort of whisper in my ear now that they know what I do. And they'll mention some title that maybe won an award or that was featured on a celebrity book club, and they'll say, I didn't get it. I didn't finish it. And it's usually because there's either no plot at all or very little plot, not enough plot to create tension, to create stakes, and do all the things that a really great, compelling story does. Okay, so now having read the opening pages, I suspect maybe both things are true. And maybe it's just that, like you said, Kathleen, this manuscript is not opening in the right place. Honestly, I don't know. I'd have to actually work with Joanna to find out for sure. It's entirely possible that if I was talking to Joanna on the phone right now, she would be able to clearly tell me in one concise sentence exactly what her book is about. And for Joanna or anybody else who needs help developing this premise statement of your novel, that's the one sentence summary, listen to season 18 of the Story Nerd podcast because Melanie is giving a fabulous introduction to it. She's going over all different types of methods for how to create the premise statement. I learned lots, and I know she did too, and you will as well if you listen to season 18. The other thing I want to mention is the timeline, and Kathleen, you picked up on this as well. In a query letter, Joanna says her story takes place from 2004 to 2005, September to September. So far, so good. However, the narrative shifts around in time so much that I quickly became confused about the timeline. I was never quite sure where or when we were. Let me give you an example. All right, so chapter 1 is called September, and it opens in March 2003 when Ilya's brother leaves. And then it jumps 18 months. So at the bottom of page 1, Joanna writes, quote, "It's been a year and a half since he's been gone." All right, that puts present day in terms of the narrative to September 2005, which, according to the query letter, is the end of the story. Then a couple of lines later, Elia references, quote, "one evening in late April when I met the boy." So I don't know which April this is. Is it April 2004? Is it April 2005? Or is it another year? If I follow the story logic here, that present day is in fact September 2005, then is this now April 2006? So whichever April it is, it's after meeting the boy that Elia's life begins to spiral, which she herself says at the bottom of page 1. But I thought her life was spiraling when the brother left. So then I'm confused about the inciting incident. Is it her brother leaving, whether he has just like moved somewhere else, or whether he has passed on? Or is it meeting the boy? It's unclear to me. So the timeline confusion continues throughout all of the 10 pages. And I didn't bother to try and track all the way through. The fact is, I got confused, and that's not what you want. Now, I want to be clear here. There's absolutely nothing wrong with flash forwards and flashbacks if they are done properly. You will hear advice out there, never do a flash forward, never do a flashback. No, there's nothing wrong with them. They're neither good nor bad. If you're going to use them, though, you have to know how to use them. So, if you're going to use them, here's what you need to keep in mind. For them to work properly, the reader always needs to know exactly where and when they are in relation to whatever the present day is in the story. And whatever it is that happens in the past or in the future, those events must propel the story that's happening in the present day. It must propel that forward, either by revealing something about the character or characters, or complicating the plot somehow or creating tension. So the decision to include a flashback or a flash forward is never random. It is always in service of the main storyline, the spine of your story. And the same, by the way, is true of dual storyline narratives. If you've got two storylines happening, the secondary timeline exists to serve the main storyline. And every time you do a flash forward or flashback or add another storyline, it increases the degree of complexity in your story. It makes it harder and harder and harder to pull off. Not easier, harder. So if you're going to do those things, you really need to know what you're doing in terms of the craft of telling a story in prose form. Now, it's not unusual for a literary novel to be a mini plot story. And if you don't know what I mean by mini plot story, go back to season 5 of the podcast and check out those episodes, particularly the one we did on The Accidental Tourist. Also, check out Robert McKee's book Story, because he has a great chapter on that. The whole book is worth buying for that chapter. So, for example, a mini plot story has a largely passive, not entirely passive, but a largely passive protagonist and a nonlinear timeline. Not unusual in a literary novel. However, because these things make the reader work harder, and remember, reading a novel is already a whole lot more work than sitting on a sofa and watching a movie or watching a TV show or scrolling on your phone. Because reading a novel is already harder work, when you have a mini plot story, it is another degree more difficult, right? Mini plot stories make the reader's work even harder than they have to work if they're reading, say, a thriller or a mystery novel or a romance. So this is another reason why the author of a literary novel has to be an expert storyteller. It's not for the faint of heart. It really isn't. It's tough to pull off. And there is no wiggle room. I'm sorry, there isn't. At the risk of sounding harsh, pretty sentences aren't going to save you. I know that sounds harsh. I know it does. But it's the truth. And I would rather be honest with you so that you know what it is you need to work on so that you're not wasting your time. Because time is the one thing you're never going to get back. Once today is spent, it is spent. What will happen, and this is either a guarantee or is pretty close to a guarantee as you're going to get in this business. If you're not an expert storyteller and you want to tackle a literary novel, the weaknesses in your storytelling ability will be on full display. Let me explain what I mean by that. If you were writing, for example, a thriller or a horror, you can kind of fudge some weaknesses in your storytelling ability there. And that's because those kinds of stories have life and death stakes, right? And they either have monstrous villains or bona fide monsters as the villains. And these things draw so much of the reader's attention that they might not notice that some other aspect of the storytelling isn't working quite so well. I'm not saying it's easy, so the thriller writers and horror writers don't come at me. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying you've got a bit more wiggle room in those types of story because there's more spectacle to work with. In quiet novels, and so this could be a literary novel, a character-driven novel, a global internal genre story, a quiet book. These is all different phrases that mean exactly the same thing. There is nowhere to hide. It's tough. Like, that is tough news to hear. I know that. So my final bit of advice, Joanna, for you is this. Go back to season 5 and 18 of the Story Nerd podcast and listen to those episodes. Those will help you develop a premise statement for your story. And once you have that, let it be your guide as you work on your novel or as you work on the next round of edits, whatever stage you're on. And then really hone your scene writing skills, because no matter what genre we're writing in, what type of story that we're writing, scenes always must be solid. Okay, Kathleen, what is your final bit of advice for Joanna?
I would say definitely work on the plot paragraph in the query letter so you can nail your premise and ensure agents understand what the story is about. And I would also work on the manuscript, both on a scene level and somewhat on a line level, to make sure the prose is magnificent and the story is structured well. The opening has got to be compelling, even if it's a slower paced novel.
All right. It's a long episode, but that wraps it up for this week. If you want us to review your query letter and first 10 pages writing sample, go to storynerd.ca for all the details about how to submit. To support the show, please leave us a rating and review and tell your writer friends about us. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. To get your free first 10 pages checklist, visit valeriefrancis.ca/checklist. And once you're on my mailing list, you'll also get copies of the query letter and writing samples that we discuss in each of these Hook Your Reader episodes. To find out more about Kathleen's agent wish list or what services she offers as an editor, visit KathleenFoxAgent.com and FoxEditorial.com, and that's Fox with 2 X's. And remember, story theory doesn't have to be difficult. It's a tool to help you write more, not less. So take it one step at a time and have fun.